Last week, we had this incredible conversation about how business storytelling is dead and what that means. However, even though in the business realm it may be looking different, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it in our own lives. So lean in and listen as Mark Carpenter and I have an incredible conversation on storytelling.
Welcome to Advance with Mike Acker, the podcast designed to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals alike break through barriers by improving their practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Your host is a best-selling author, executive coach, and founder of the Advance Public Speaking School and Advantage Publishing Group, two companies dedicated to providing an edge for leaders. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Now here's your host, Mike Acker.
And welcome to the program. I'm so excited for this, Mark. I'm so excited that you're joining me. Thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, Mike, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Now, often what I do when I'm just doing something on my own is I do a one-shot, no-edit show, but we have two communicators here, so it's going to be great. We'll do a one-shot, no-edit show. And my reminder to all my listeners and my viewers on YouTube is, look, Flubs, they're part of life. So if something it's not the end of the world. So give yourself a little bit of a break. Don't beat yourself up too much. And at the same time, we're going to give you some tools today on storytelling that's going to help you level up. Mark, why are you the person to talk to us about storytelling and really the art and science of it?
Well, thank you. And again, I'm thrilled to be with you here. I totally agree with what you said about let's just work straight through the flubs. When I talk to people about storytelling and they're worried about their disfluencies that come up, I say, yeah, work on those, but don't get so hung up on them that you become a robot and you're not human. So yeah. I've told stories all my life. I think I started out as a kid telling stories because I was the fourth of 5 children and I was just trying to get relationships and get myself to stand out a little bit more. And I found that stories were a way to connect people. As I grew older and I started my career in corporate public relations and marketing, I used storytelling there a lot to make points that I wanted to make, to illustrate what we were talking about. And then I transitioned my career into that of facilitation and learning. I helped a friend write a book. I basically ghost wrote it for him. It took about a year to do this, getting his ideas and writing them out. And at the end of the year, I said to my wife, I feel like I should write my book, but I don't know what my book is. She looks at me and says, oh, I know. And I'm like, wait a minute. How can you know what my book is when I don't know what my book is? And she said, you've got to write a book about how you take everyday experiences and turn them into teaching moments. You turn them into stories that can teach people something. And I said, yeah, I do that, but doesn't everybody do that? And she looks at me and says, no, that's not natural for everybody. That's natural for you, but it's not natural for other people. So I started looking into that. As I started talking to people about it, they said, I would totally read that book. I totally need that. So I got with my friend, my co-author now, Daryl Harmon, and we wrote this book. And I found out a lot of things that I didn't know before, that I was more of an accidental storyteller. Now I'm a more deliberate storyteller. And my goal is to help other people to influence in a positive way through effective storytelling.
And I love this because I tell people to tell stories a lot. I help them tell stories. And a lot of my communication coaching, I talk to people about when you're in an interview, don't feel like the moment you get asked a question, you have to blurt out everything that you have to say. In fact, sometimes what you just need to do is tell a story. Somebody says, how can you do this and this and this? Instead of filling it up with a whole bunch of bullet points, tell them a time where you did that thing. So how do we do this? And who needs storytelling? Let's start out with this really broad question. Who is this relevant for?
So you just gave one great example there. Anybody in an interview process, that's one of the great places. And I totally am with you on that. instead of answering the question with, well, I might do this and this and this and this, tell them a time when you actually did it.
Yeah.
That's going to stand out. That's going to help people remember you better in that interview.
Yeah, you're contextualizing it. You're putting it all in a nice bundle. You're proving the point that you did it and that you did it, not just that you know about it.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've ever been in a hiring manager situation. Have you ever done that, Mike?
Yeah,
A
whole bunch. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you sit through those interviews and you hear people answer those questions the exact same way, and nobody stands out. So who's going to stand out? It's the one that tells the story. So there's one example. So another thing that you do is you speak from the stage often. How often in your speeches do you tell a story?
Frequently.
Why?
As much as I can, without just letting it be a show about me.
Yeah.
So,
and why do you do that?
Yeah, for me, it's always that I want people to see themselves in the story. And so if I'm telling a story about how I hired this person and it didn't go well, and here Mark came in and he just this and this and this, and then I didn't like Mark or whatever it is, they're going, oh yeah, me too. I had that same story. And then I can land that punchline.
Yeah, exactly. So stories connect people.
Yeah.
Any situation, any role that you're in where you need to connect with people, storytelling can be beneficial for you. We, in our master storytelling workshop, we asked that question as one of our early breakout group activities. We say, where could you use storytelling? And people kind of look at me funny and go, well, everywhere. And it's like, no, I want you to get more detail on that. So just getting into some of the more detail on that. Anytime you need to lead, you probably need storytelling. Storytelling is going to help you rather than just, we're out of the command and control leadership phase of life.
Right.
We're in the stage where leadership is influence. And storytelling can help you influence people by making those connections that you were just talking about, and to really help them illustrate points. There's a cool bit of research that's found in the book Influencer. And they talked about how there was a group of researchers who wanted to see what the impact of storytelling was. And they figured that storytelling would help people remember information better. So they divided their research subjects into 3 groups. One group, they just got information verbally. The second group got the information and it was illustrated with charts and graphs. And the third group got the information in the form of a story. Now, the interesting thing that they found was that their assumption was right. Their hypothesis was correct. That the third group who heard it in the story remembered the information better.
Yeah.
The thing that they weren't planning for, that they didn't expect that they got, was the third group also found the information more credible. And they remembered it more accurately. So they remembered more of the information and more accurately, and they found the information more credible. So think about that.
Right.
As you're trying to get an important point across, in whatever position you're in, if you want people to remember it more accurately, and find it more credible, storytelling can help you do that.
I love that credibility aspect right there. When we tell the story, people go, oh, okay, this person's done there, he's been there. Sometimes we can do over storytelling. And I did that probably in the first edition of my first book. I veered on the side of too much. And one of the main comments I got back was, there's too many stories in this. Although some people found that the best part. Like, just tell more stories. And so in the second edition, I kind of refined that. So let's ask the other side of that. Where should we be careful of storytelling?
Well, I like your point that it needs to be part of your overall communication strategy, not your only communication strategy. I was teaching this to a group of sales professionals, and one of them, it's the let me play devil's advocate person, raises their hand and says, I can't just not give information like features and benefits to my clients. I just looked at him and said, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that at all. You're going to share features and benefits, but if people don't know what those features and benefits mean to them, if they can't relate to it and connect to it, they're still not going to buy from you.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
And they came back later and said, yeah, that actually worked for me. That was actually very helpful.
because you're illustrating how they actually use it. What's going on in the human mind and the human psychology that causes people to want and love stories so much?
Part of it is what you talked about earlier, Mike, which was it's the relatability. It's their thought process of, oh yeah, I've been there too. I feel your pain is what it comes down to. And Dr. Paul Zak out of Claremont Graduate University has done a lot of research around this. And he's identified 3 brain reactions that actually happen when we hear a well-told story. So not just I'm going to tell you what happened at work today, but a carefully crafted, intentional story with the point to teach something, to lead, to sell, to inspire. The first thing that happens is we get an increase in the hormone oxytocin. That's what happens when people say, oh, yeah, I can relate to that. Oxytocin is often referred to as the trust hormone. Think about that. You want people to trust you? I mean, you definitely want people to trust you as a leader, and even as a sales representative, you want people to trust you. This can help build trust. So within the brain, you're building that trust when people say, yeah, I can relate to what you're talking about. I can feel that pain. Now, the second thing that happens that Dr. Zak identified is that if you introduce some risk to a quality goal, in other words, you can see that you want to accomplish something, but something gets in the way of that. It increases cortisol within people. Just a very slight increase in cortisol. But the impact of that is it causes people to pay more attention. This is what's going to retain the memory. We're going to extend the memory of the people as they listen to stories, is they've got that slight increase in cortisol. And then when you come to a satisfactory resolution at the end of that story, they get an increase in the neurotransmitter dopamine. And have you heard of dopamine before?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so do you know what the impact of dopamine is?
Yeah, happiness.
Yeah, it's the feel good. It gives you that sense of satisfaction there at the end of the story. And that leaves you walking away, not only remembering it better, but feeling good about what you just heard. So think about the impact of that on people as you're trying to teach, lead, sell, and inspire.
So what I love is that there's all this psychology of what's going on here and the health reasons, but there's historical reasons too that people love it. I mean, we're rooted. We are story beings. Our lives are a story that's being written, and so there's so much to that as well. Now the problem is that people don't often, maybe they don't have that experience, and maybe they do some things that are not great, or sometimes they schedule a interview right while there's lawn care going on outside. So I just was like, oh, okay, great. We make mistakes at times. We don't always think everything through. And that happens in story too, that in the midst of it, they can get lost. So I have some of my ideas of what are mistakes that people make, but tell me, what are some mistakes that people make when telling stories?
Yeah, and let me go back to what you just said, Mike, about, sometimes we make mistakes like scheduling things when lawn care is going on. By the way, I can't hear that really well, so I don't think that's picking up very much
on your side. It'll pick up on the recording. Everybody's going to start listening to it. So,
some of the best stories we tell are our mistake stories, because everybody makes mistakes. We know this. Yeah, and
they're
so that
people's
makes it more
favorite stories. They like that.
Yeah, people love to hear that.
Calling someone old when I was speaking.
Yeah, we've all made those kind of mistakes. And so that, again, makes it more relatable. But some of the common mistakes that I've seen as we've been teaching master storytelling that people make is, number one, it's what I mentioned earlier. We're not as deliberate about it as we should be. So we just go off on a narrative. We just start talking about this, and we hope that the point finds itself.
Yeah.
Instead, I encourage people to find what your point is and make sure that you're going to make that point in the story. And that actually helps overcome this second problem that I see, which is people don't do the story in the right length. They're either too short because they're rushing through it, or they're too long because they're getting too much in there. We call that they don't land the plane. They're just flying around and not getting to the destination that they need to in the story.
Yeah.
Having clarity in your own mind on what's the point that I'm trying to make here will help overcome those problems. And
Yeah.
then the third one that I see sometimes is that people use too much jargon in their storytelling. This stuff is intuitive to them, but maybe not to other people. I listened to a nurse one time, and she was telling a story. I think she was trying to make the point about how people can choose to react to things in different ways. And I say, I think that was the point, because I got so lost in her story when she was using acronyms and language that I didn't understand. My wife's an X-ray technician. And so there were times during that story, I would turn to her and say, what does that mean? And she'd explain to me what that means. And then I'd come back to the story. But I got lost in it because I'm not a medical professional, and I couldn't understand the terminology that she was using.
I think that, let me add on to something right there, because I think it's not even just assuming the jargon is understood, but assuming a lot. Well, and anytime that you say something like that, you're probably making a mistake in storytelling. Well, when you do this, and people are thinking, no, I don't know that, or just skipping through, and a lot of times maybe undervaluing your own part of the story because people think they're not interested in it.
Yeah,
and that's kind of fast forwarding.
Thank you. Because that's one of the challenges that we face in storytelling. We lived something, and so we think it's every day. We think it's normal.
Yeah.
And
well, I lived in Mexico for 7 years, no big deal, which is true. And people are like, whoa, no, that is a big deal. Or you wrote a book. That's a big deal, Mark. And when I wrote a book.
And it's funny because I use that as an example of this very often. Because before I wrote a book, I looked at people who wrote books and thought, well, they're so cool.
Yeah.
They must be so smart. Now I've written a book and it's like, oh, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal anymore. But we tend to undervalue our own experiences,
right,
and we shouldn't do that. The other thing you bring up when you're referencing saying, a lot, is we don't understand who our audience is. You know this as a speaker. One of the first things you want to know going into your speaking engagement is, who am I talking to? Who are these people? What are their backgrounds? That's going to help you to edit and craft your story in a way that actually relates to them. If I've got a group of attorneys and I had an experience before the Supreme Court, I'm going to want to share that experience about the Supreme Court and what happened there. If I don't have that, I might want to share an experience that happened just with a coworker, because I want the audience to be able to relate to what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that you said on the first mistake is the too short and too long. Yeah, it's so funny because I was working with this person today, and I'll use an example. If you tell the story of, I got in a car accident, you can go too long, you go too short. Oh man, the other day I got in a car accident and now I'm in pain. Too short. Wait, what happened? Wait, what? You got in a car accident? Yeah, car accident. No big deal, just a car accident. Too short. And then too long is, I left my house at 7:58 and I pulled out onto the driveway. I closed the garage door. I backed up in the street, drove down to the road, took a right, took a left, drove there for 14 minutes. And then right over by Publix, I saw that this was happening. I looked off to the side and it's like, oh my gosh, just get to the point.
You lost me before you got to Publix.
Right. So what do you do? How do you fix these mistakes? How do you not go too long and how do you not go too short?
It really comes back to understanding what is the point that I'm trying to make. And then looking at the experience and say, what are the details in there that I need to make that point? And what are the details in there that are superfluous to that point? Part of it also is just, again, intentionally crafting your story so that it's not just a complete narrative, start to finish, this is what happened, but thinking about what's the stage I need to set here at the beginning so that I can make this relatable to my audience. And all you need is simple things. I'll use your example.
Yeah.
I got in the car to drive to the store. That's all I really need in the setup. Everybody else goes, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
I've gotten in the car to drive to the store.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell them that it was a bright sunny day. I don't need to tell them what the temperature was. Just get that relatable point. Here's current state. Then you need to get to what's breaking me out of that current state. What's going to make me a little uncomfortable in this? I got to the store. As I went to turn left into the parking lot, I was distracted a little bit by some kids that were jumping rope on the sidewalk. And I thought it was odd that they were doing that right there by the store. So I didn't see the truck that was barreling at me in the other direction. Well, now all of a sudden I got your attention.
Yeah, that's good.
Because it's like, oh no, I've been in that situation. I've never been hit by a truck before. What's going to happen next? And then I can say it sideswiped me. And what did I learn from that? Now, I'm not going to try to make up a lesson off of that. I want to get to that point, because that's the third part of it, is what changed as a result of this? What did I learn from this? What did I take away from this? And that's the point that I'm trying to get across to you. And maybe we need to be more deliberate about the things that we do as a routine to keep ourselves from stepping into problems that we weren't aware of.
This is so huge. And I know one of the things that maybe people are thinking, because I've heard it, is I got to think about stories. Don't they just happen naturally? And one thing is, it happens natural to a person who's been thinking about it organically in their life. You and I grew up probably in more storytelling cultures, storytelling environments, storytelling families, storytelling situations. So it comes naturally to us because we practiced it growing up, just like that natural baseball player over here. Well, yeah, but they've been swinging a bat since they were 3 years old. And so that wasn't natural in my family. So my son's not going to grow up natural over here. So that's one thing on that. It's only natural because they did it at some point in time on a concerted effort. And then the second would be, yeah, I do think you need stories for all kinds of different situations. In fact, not only for business, and we're kind of talking about this in leadership and in the work-life interviews leadership, but really, I tell people, you need some pocket stories, things that you can do and things that you can bring in, because you'll be more interesting if you have a story that you can just kind of pull out and tell.
Yeah,
right. Nodding, so I'm just going to let you jump in.
I'm just going, yep, preach, Mike. Just go ahead. Just keep it going, because you're right in line with what I'm thinking. To that first point about people are like, well, but I'm not a natural storyteller. The other people do this naturally. I can't do this. Well, it's like any skill. That's why I loved your analogy there with the baseball player. We look at a professional baseball player and we go, they are just gifted at this. Well, we don't know the thousands of hours that they've put into this,
right?
And the thousands of hours of coaching they got from that too. So if this isn't a natural skill for you, build the skill the same way you build any other skill in your life. Find somebody who knows how to do it. Let them help you get started. Practice it. Get some feedback. Practice it some more. Get some more feedback. Some of the best feedback you'll get on storytelling is the eyeballs of the people who are listening to you. You've likely experienced this on the stage, where you told a story and it didn't land.
That didn't land. Not gonna tell that story.
We used the same phrase.
Yeah.
And it just didn't land. Well, that doesn't mean you're a failure at storytelling. That means you've got a learning opportunity to take that and grow from it and say, how am I going to adjust that? Or what's a better story that I could tell to make that point that will land better? And so it's just like anything else that we learn. It's a practice skill, and guided practice is the best way to get you there.
I love that. Guided practice, best way to get you there. I think that is a fantastic way to think about it. And if you think about all these sports players, they get familiar with the sport. They get familiar. I was at soccer practice with my son yesterday, and there's this little 2.5-year-old who had some moves. And he's just playing there, and he's playing with his older brother, and he's playing with his dad and his grandpa. He's just practicing. So what's going to happen is he's going to become a 12-year-old down the road, 10 years down the road. And people are going to say, well, he's just so natural at soccer. No, it's just because of that practice. Now, those people had it at a younger age. So you might be wherever you are in your profession, in your career, and you may have not ever had that, but it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to jump in and start, especially when it is one of those things that can break that barrier, going back to interviews or leadership. And it's just incredibly huge. But where can we get these stories from? I think this is a good question, because people are going, okay, I'm convinced. I want to be a better leader. I want to motivate my team. I want to build the culture of stories. I want to brand my story. I want to do all those things. Where do people get it when they live ordinary, so-called ordinary lives?
Well, you mentioned it earlier. We love stories because we live stories. The stories are our life. What is our life other than just a connection of little connected stories as we go through? So we have these all the time. Let me actually answer that question with a story, if that's okay. You shouldn't be surprised that would come from me.
I was going to ask you at some point to tell one anyway. So there you go.
So I was working on a trainer certification. I was leading some people through a trainer certification. And I told them one of the things you need to do is you need to tell a story that's going to relate to the point that you're going to make in your teach back session tomorrow. And I asked the question, where are you going to come up with these stories? Well, I had one participant who raised their hand, called on her, and she said, oh, I just make them up. And I said, what do you mean you make them up? And she said, well, anytime I have a point that I need to make with people, I tell them a story about my crazy Uncle Ned. I don't even have an Uncle Ned, but I just make things up that he does. And I'm listening to this, standing in front of the room of about 10 people and thinking, how am I going to keep a safe environment here and tell her, I think that's a bad idea? And somebody else in the class bailed me out. And they said, I'm not sure that would come across as fully authentic. I said, yeah, it's best that we use real life experiences. She comes up to me after this session and goes, I don't know how I'm going to get a story. I don't have any life experiences. My life's boring. I don't have any place to go with this. How am I going to do this? And she's in a panic over this. So we talked about, looking for experiences in her life, looking for those moments of emotion. As human beings, we're emotional creatures. And so any emotion that hits us, there's probably a lesson in that story. The other thing I encouraged her to do is, what topic you need to teach. So look back and say, what have you experienced that's taught you that moment? And so going forward, look for what are the topics that I need to teach, and just have that on your radar, and they'll start popping up for you. In fact, that's actually what happened with this woman. She left my conversation still worried, and I was a little worried for her. She came back the next day. She delivered a great teach back and told a fantastic story. So I asked her, where did you come up with this story? And she kind of had a heavy sigh in there, because she realized that she'd kind of been caught in her idea that making up stories was okay. She said, last night here at the hotel, I was preparing and I was really worried about this story. I didn't know what to do, so I decided I just need to take a walk. So she gets on the elevator. Going down the elevator, somebody else gets on with her. She has an interaction with this person on the elevator. She walks off the elevator. She starts walking around the hotel, and she thinks, that was such a weird interaction. That person really reacted in a weird way. And she said, I stopped dead in my tracks. And I went, there's my story. That illustrates exactly what I'm trying to teach tomorrow. And she went back up to her room and crafted it into a story. Because she was looking for it, the experience when it came was readily apparent to her. So look for the examples that you're trying to illustrate. It's like the universe will send them to you. The other thing I encourage people to do is ask other people. You can borrow stories from other people. I tell stories that my friends have told me because they illustrate a point better than my experience has. It's okay to borrow those. Give credit. Don't turn it into your own story. Give credit where credit is due. But you can borrow the experiences of others if there's one that fully demonstrates the principle you're trying to teach.
One time I was climbing up this mountain. I lost 2 legs, so I had these replacement prosthetics on. Wait a minute, what?
Now everybody's looking at your feet and trying to figure out, are those look like real feet down there?
What's amazing is I was at this conference one time and I'm speaking and I'm doing all the classical speaking skill. And I had stories involved in it and it went fantastic. And I got the reviews back from the participants and it was really well received. The person after me came up and didn't have some of the speaker skill, didn't have some of the points, didn't have the PowerPoint slides, weren't as crafted and professional, all this. But his story quite literally was that he climbs mountains and he's an amputee. So guess what speaker stood out more?
Yeah.
The one with the story.
Yeah. And so back to your original point there too, Mike. Well, what if I'm not the amputee who climbs mountains? I don't have this huge, big life event. I didn't almost die at some point. I didn't start a $1 billion company from a $1 bill. Where do I get these stories? It doesn't matter. You don't have to have that big of a story, because most of the things you're sharing, most of the principles you're going to try to teach are not going to require that big of a story.
Yeah.
And the everyday experiences are so relatable to people that those are the ones that actually have a lot of power in your day to day.
Absolutely. And even in this situation right here, two of us getting up, and I shared some stories and he shared some stories, and his stories were more wow and more in your face. And he's fantastic. And he's got all kinds of incredible things. So no dismissal, but it's going to hit in different areas. Yeah. And of course, not every situation is something where you can get there and do all this stuff. And you can't go into a story like that all the time, but you can weave in these everyday stories.
Yep.
on a regular basis. And when I'm telling a story, I'm grabbing from my own life, but I love what you said right there, also grabbing from other people's lives and telling their stories and telling it in a way that is going to make that point. And a great idea that I've often had for people, and maybe you've done something similar in your workshops, is to have almost a notebook where you're jotting down different stories. I do this for YouTube episodes, like, oh, I want to do a YouTube on this. I want to do something on this. And this is a story. And this is something I could tell. What are some things that you tell people in your workshops? Tell us, are these a day-long workshops? Talk to us a little bit about that and what might somebody learn from this?
Yeah, it's a half-day workshop. And we do it virtually as well. When we do it virtually, we do it in 3 95-minute sessions over 3 days, which gives people a little bit of chance to absorb and to connect on that. But we teach them the brain science around storytelling, why it works, where you can use it, how to craft a story, what actually is involved in creating a good story versus a story that's going to go too long or go too short. We also give people a chance to practice it. That's one of the best things about it, is we get them to pick an everyday experience. They're going to craft it in the format that we teach them, and then they get a chance to practice with each other and get some feedback. Yeah. So they walk away actually with a couple of different stories that are ready to tell, that are going to make a point.
I think that's fantastic. And of course, we'll drop some show notes and on YouTube and such in the description about just how people can find you and such as well. But before we wrap up, before we go there, tell us a little bit, give us kind of a small little nugget that just says, look, you need this. It's essential leadership skill. And this is why storytelling is essential.
So my nugget, of course, will come in the form of a story.
Yeah, do it. I would be disappointed if it wasn't.
I was teaching these skills to a group of bank executives. Okay. Now think of bank executives. What's their background in terms of how you get things done and what's important to share with people?
Yeah, they're the most laughter, easygoing, Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, pretty much the opposite of what you just said, right? Yeah. They're really buttoned down. Numbers are super important to them. Data, information, that's what drives decisions. That's what drives what we do. And I was brought into this organization because one of the challenges they had was they had good high-level goals that they all agreed on, but the different departments, as they went to accomplish their goals, were either doing things that overlapped with each other or left gaps, and they were assuming the other groups were doing it. I stood in front of this group, 30 of the top level executives in this organization, this financial services institution. I start telling them about the value of storytelling, and I'm getting eye rolls and I'm getting arms folded and leaning back and checking their watches. Well, it came a point where we had a break right before I got them into actually doing an activity with what I taught them. Literally, I texted my co-author and I said, this ain't working with this group. They're not buying into it. This is going bad. But when I got back in and I said, here's your assignment. You're going to get in your functional groups. You're going to identify an experience from your functional group that shows how you're contributing to the top line goals of the organization. And you're going to assign one person to come up and tell that story. So craft it together, based on the principles that I just taught you, stand up and deliver it. We got into these groups and there was a lot of energy that started coming out of that. And each of the groups stood up and told their story. The responses they got from other people was, I had no idea you were doing that. Or how we could really work together on something like this.
Yeah.
And when we got to the end, I asked the group, what did you take away from this? And the first comment that I got was, I just want to see if we can do it again. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we have more stories we'd like to tell. Could we tell another story from our group? And so we did another round of it.
Yeah.
And back to that question, what did you take away? The compliance director. Okay, so think of who the compliance director is. Raises his hand when I ask, what did you take away? And he said this, I've learned that stories are infinitely more compelling than data.
Yeah.
It's a huge takeaway. You could have knocked me over with a feather at that point. I was so shocked that came out. But I heard from the people I was working with in that organization from that point on, there were several of the leaders that started every meeting with, let me tell you a story to give you context of what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Good.
Got people gelled together and overcame that problem with the silos that they had within the organization.
When we go watch a movie, we never watch a movie full of bullet points.
Right.
Nobody ever gets up on screen and just, there's dialogue, there's conflict, there's emotion. And it's a multi-billion, trillion-dollar industry. I mean, really trillion, because there's movies that are stories that are making billions of dollars. So why aren't we doing it?
And there's movies that don't make that much money.
Yeah.
Why?
Sometimes because the story isn't compelling.
They lack the things you just talked about. They don't have compelling characters that we can relate to. Yeah. They don't have any conflict. My wife and I watched a Netflix movie, had some good actors in it.
Yeah.
And we watched it and we got to the end and went, that was so boring. Because there was no conflict. There was nothing that created any sense of urgency in the story.
Which could lead us into a whole point of Netflix right now is just kind of going, let's just full throttle anything and everything because we need more content. And if you don't take time to think through where you're going to go, you end up with a Netflix junk one versus something that's actually quality. Yeah. This is fascinating. We go in all kinds of different areas about what people could do to tell a story. Of course, you got a book on this, and tell us a little bit about where we could find that book, and maybe they could even get an ebook or something as well.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon. So just search for Master Storytelling. There'll be a couple other things that come up, but look for that cover that's in my background here and you'll find us. But anybody, just as a gift to your podcast listeners for staying with us today, I'd be happy to offer a free ebook to anybody who would like one.
Cool.
And so just send me an email. My email is Mark, M-A-R-K, so just the traditional spelling, mark@master-storytelling.com. And the hyphen's really, really important to get you to the right place. So mark@master-storytelling.com. Just say, I heard you on Mike's podcast. I'd love to get a copy of the book. I'll send you a free ebook.
And we'll put that in the podcast notes, and we'll put it in the show notes and the YouTube as well, because I think it'd be very helpful. Because sometimes, especially if someone's going, man, I'm not doing this, it's good to get inspired with a story about storytelling, but then you almost need some of those those bullet points to lead you through how to tell a story.
Yeah.
If you weren't raised in this kind of environment. I know that because I work with a lot of people who need to be telling stories.
Yeah. And you're right. Once you know the fundamentals, you'll see it in all the stories. Yeah. But if you don't, you listen to a story and you go, that worked, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
And we share both of those with you. We share examples of how they work, and we show you what you're seeing in those examples in the book and in the workshop.
So interesting. I just listened to Will Smith's autobiography recently, and he talks about the power of understanding stories. Like early on when he understood, he was always a performer, but when he understood, like it was this moment in time where his career took off because he knew what to look for in the stories that he wanted to portray. And then Donald Miller of Storybrand, which is, in newspapers and all kinds of stuff, is really the story of business. And once similar, he talks about the power of stories and how it really launched his life and his career. But if you need to become a storyteller, then I love what you are putting together here in your book. And that's Mark Carpenter. If for those who are listening, it's a black and red font, and it's got a little yellow background and light bulb. But Mark, this has been absolutely great. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you for sharing some of the stories, the principles, and the importance of it. Really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's been great talking to you. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And to all of our guests, thank you for tuning in, listening, watching. Please take a moment, like, subscribe, share, make a comment, drop a comment of something that really stood out to you, or tell us your story. Until next time, this is Mike Acker with Advance.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.